Now that we've started reading the Odyssey, I wanted to take some time to make sure that you really understood what an epic poem actually is. So we're going to go over the elements of an epic. Now this quote is important because we've talked a little bit about, or I had you read a little bit about, the way an epic really communicates the manners, customs, and values that as ancient civilization, in this case we're looking at ancient Greece, really held to be true in their lives. So epics are a great way to go beyond just the historical facts of an ancient culture and look at what the people really valued, the things that they thought were important, and it really does kind of exemplify their lives. Even though they're myths, those things are going to come true. So fiction can sometimes tell us what it is that ancient people might have thought or valued, worried about, feared, hoped for, all of those things. So what is an epic? First of all, it's a very long, thousands of lines usually, narrative, which means it's going to tell a story, poem. Okay, so it's almost always written in poetry form. Now remember, the epic that we're reading is a translation from ancient Greek. So you can go to Barnes & Noble and pick up a copy of the Odyssey that's actually not written in poetry form and instead attempts to tell the story as a novel. So that's okay. It's not that there's a right or wrong, but most of the time epics are going to be in poetry form. It's a long narrative poem that is told in stately or formal language. So of course you've probably noticed by now that the language is very elevated. It's a formal style, and it's considered a formal example of poetry. In addition, an epic is going to have a very large setting. So remember, I taught you this. It's going to have a macrocosmic, which means large world, large universe setting. It's not going to just take place in one spot. It might even travel into different worlds. So you might have it dip down into the underworld or at one point be on Mount Olympus. The other part of a macrocosmic setting, though, is not just place, but also time. So usually epics cover and span a very large amount of time. So of course, in the case of the Odyssey, we have an epic that's going to span the course of 20 years. Now, of course, we don't see all 20 years, but we know that Odysseus has been away from home for 10 years at the start of the story. An epic is usually going to have an epic hero. Now, a couple of things that will make a character an epic hero. One is that it's not usually going to be, in fact, it's not going to be a servant, or it's not that diamond in the rough story like Aladdin or something like that, where you have a poor character who sort of rises to the top as being something special. You're not going to see that in ancient epics. The hero is already going to be of someone of great importance. So Odysseus is already important. He's the king of Ithaca. And furthermore, he's legendary for his intelligence, and he has great strength and courage. Now notice that it says here superhuman strength and courage. He's not an immortal. He's not even partially immortal. He's a regular person, but he has above average, above normal, superhuman strength and courage, and intelligence as well. So generally your epic hero is going to not be your regular person. It's going to be somebody who we might call exceptional. Okay, an epic is going to have a lot of characters and also subplots. So in the case of the Odyssey, your subplot are the parts of the story that go back to Ithaca and look at things like the struggle that Odysseus's wife Penelope is having in fending off the suitors. And you're also going to have Telemachus' story as he's coming of age at the start of the story, and also having to try to help his mother fend off these suitors and find out what happened to his father. So you don't just have Odysseus' story, you have a lot of subplots going on as well. Okay. You're also going to have, of course, within an epic, supernatural, so again, above the natural, elements are going to be involved. Now, in the case of a Greek epic, it's usually going to be gods and goddesses, and you're going to have some extraordinary things like that would defy logic and defy science and some of the things that we understand. Okay, that's where you have to just remember we're talking about a myth. So there's going to be some elements of this that really probably defy normal behavior or scientific laws, and that's just a part of an epic as well. Okay, we've already read the part of an epic that begins with an invocation. So remember, to invoke means to ask. So the invocation is like a prayer or request. And in the case of a Greek myth, it's usually to the muses, the goddesses who are in charge of the gifts and the arts. So, of course, this is exactly the way that Homer begins the Odyssey. Okay, we haven't talked about this yet, but if you look at an epic, most of the time, once you get past the invocation, you have the story just jumping right in. It doesn't have a long exposition. It doesn't often go in order, like the Odyssey is largely a flashback. And the narrative is just going to begin in what's called in medias res. This is a Latin phrase that simply means in the middle of things. So it just begins right in the middle of the story. Now, of course, for Homer, his audience would have already been familiar with many parts of this story. So that kind of makes sense that it could start in the middle, because Homer could expect that his audience would know a lot of the parts already. And his telling might just be the unique feature. Okay, epic similes are a common part of an epic. And sometimes, as I mentioned here, they're so long that you almost forget what you're reading about in the first place. They can become these whole digressions from the story, where Homer's trying to give us some kind of an image or a sight or a sound that we can connect to. So in what we've read so far, a good example of this would be the description of Hermes or Mercury on his way, strapping on his golden sandals and flying on his way to tell Calypso that she must release Odysseus by Zeus's order. And there's a scene where he's described as skimming over the water the way a seagull might skim over the water and then dip down to catch a fish. This is how close he is able to run and fly on top of the water. And those kinds of passages are called epic similes. So you're going to want to watch for those as we read throughout the rest of the text. Okay, there's some other parts of epics that I want you to start paying attention to. At some point, and we may have some of this in our text and maybe not, but if we were to read the full Odyssey, we would definitely see catalogs. Now, the equivalent to this, if you're familiar with the Bible, would be the begats. So just a whole series of so-and-so begat so-and-so who begat so-and-so, and it's basically just a big family tree, just a list. So catalogs are just simply lists, and often it's about people's or characters' lineage or their background. And this is important in ancient times especially, because you could show, for example, that you come from a long line of kings or royalty or strong, courageous people or whatever it may be. So catalogs are often a big part of epics. You'll notice too, characters will stop and give long formal speeches. In fact, sometimes it's easy to forget that someone was even speaking in the first place because they've gone on so long. So we will definitely see passages where we have a long formal speech. Also, epics use a lot of what are called epithets. Epithets are small little phrases that delineate a personality by the attributes possessed by that person. So for example, an epic might say, Achilles the Invincible. In what we've read so far, we've seen a couple. Odysseus, son of Laertes. So that just simply states his lineage. But it also might be versatile Odysseus, or heedful Penelope, or cautious Telemachus, or whatever it may be. And those are called epithets. They're little descriptive phrases that you'll start to notice more and more as we read the Odyssey. The last thing I want to talk about are the themes of an epic. The reason they last for 3,000 years is, number one, the stories are entertaining and they're very informative as to what ancient cultures were like. But number two, usually the themes have to be universal or they just wouldn't last. And universal means they're going to appeal to not only many different kinds of people, but they have the power to move across time. And so nothing's going to last for 3,000 years if it doesn't really get into issues that are still relevant today. So, for example, we're going to see the Odyssey deal with topics such as loyalty, perseverance. For example, when things get hard, the message in the Odyssey is you can't quit, you can't stop trying, you have to hope that there'll be a promise of a new day. Another one that we're going to continually be talking about is that issue of self-command versus self-indulgence. These topics never go away. They always are going to be topics of conversation and relevance for human beings, because it's a big part of being alive, no matter whether you lived 3,000 years ago or whether you're living in 2016. So that's what we mean by universal themes. They span both space and time, as well as peoples. So you don't have to be Greek to appreciate the themes within the Odyssey. Okay, so those are the major components of an epic. And I want to make sure that you understand those. Now that we've read a little bit of the story, I think that makes a lot more sense. So I usually wait to talk about this once we've actually started the epic. Okay, so at this point, I want you to read the passage about epics and answer the corresponding questions. Thank you.